Okay.
Hello.
Hey.
So then, do you want to try the slides?
Okay. So
Should be enabled. Remember to share the sound.
thank you. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, well, that looks nice. That's very nice.
Yes, but it's not moving, so maybe. Try. Okay.
Yeah. Oh.
Can I try the sound?
Yeah.
Going forward with this new medium of video.
Perfect.
Yeah, so, and I guess we won't start. We're going to wait another 8 minutes, and then Israel will give some kind of very brief introduction to transmutation. I told him that you are going to say some word, very brief word about transmutation also. So there's no need for long introductions. And that we're going to do the question answer at the end, and so on. Olivia.
Hello, Professor Cole.
Hi, greetings to Olomouc.
I'm actually in Texas, but thanks.
Texas?
Yeah.
Wow, where in Texas?
Lubbock, at Texas Tech University.
Very good. This was the country for John Dealey. He was
Exactly.
in Houston. He was in Houston for many years. Yeah. For how long will you be there?
I just arrived, and it's for 2 months, so until the end of May.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll wait 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes, and put the music back in.
Now they want to bring it, but today I woke up and I don't feel like the gift. And I don't really feel the time I keep keeping at the table. Had to earn my seat. I was grinding while you sleeping. I was out here in the streets. While the mothers getting laid back. Well, I guess this wish to pay back. Sit around here to the only guy. Trying to make it out of it. Just the only plan. Which is so I left. Still only bad. Not about only fine. It was only a dream. Big drip, Alexander McQueen. I'm a long way from home to the fiends. It was only a dream. Only a dream. Seeing now out of tape is kind of right for the mood. Should I wear the suede ones or the spikes on the lubes? Hack a duck salad is my kind of food. And when you hear me on the song, it's only right trying to do more. Sent to show, but could have got more. Came for the now I can talk. I can't give a man time with Dave. I felt your energy and weren't too short. Let's see his friend get. Maybe on the front line trying to do more. I wanna this right, bust that light, could have got more. Came out the background, shoes like Mac rounds, man better stand down.
I was talking to Ľudmila about this.
Check that onside ran down. Online calls and pass are cool and I'm just there like Santan. All them slide ones but I don't say. Man got my ears
Because of the intimacy,
gotta get more.
because of our relationship
Gotta
with
get
our
more. See
computers,
little bread but gotta get more. Man I got shoes but gotta get more.
that's our relationship with the screen. I
Man
was
get love but should I get more?
already
Running up
bored
numbers trying to do more. Sent to show but could have got.
that is public
Could have got more. Man I like show you could do more. I can't like work based in poor. Last 5 years I've been living on tour. You can ask get hard on about four. Still get to do more.
power
In that door. I'm that guy you can't ignore. Still gotta get mine. 10 years plus still that grind. I'm my own person. Don't know what kind of sick flow, sick concept, sick
I
grind.
think there's more to
In
it.
the head. Won't stop till the day that I'm dead. I spin a winning, you know the score. But still, man, I gotta do more. Gotta get more. Man, see blessings, gotta get more. See little bread, but gotta get more. Man, I got shoes, but gotta get more. Man, get love, but should I get more? Running up numbers, trying to do more. Sent to show, but could have got. Give me more, give me more. Step tight in some design.
We'll wait for the song.
I put all my white keys in the ends. Keep being you, cause you gotta get yours. If you don't like me, no pause. I read the email, I saw the offer, told Emily we gotta ask for a bit more. Play with me and put your life on pause. Oh my gosh, man, I rate it highly. I'm with the OGs, I'm with the YGs. Dude, yeah, go them sign me. So they wanna be this man try me, yeah. I'm with Napo and them, man. Give me more, but I ain't trying to beg, man. I saw your girl when she was like high. Me, I get higher than leopard and red, man. Gotta get more. Man, see blessings, gotta get more. See little bread, but gotta get more. Man, I got shoes, but gotta get more. Man, get love, but should I get more? Running up numbers, trying to do more.
So you're gonna want to use these. Or, I mean, I guess you should. Just while you're introducing, in case someone chimes in, say something to you. And then you can hand them back to me when you're done. Yeah.
All right.
Ask them if they can hear you.
So, hello everybody. You can hear me? I hope you can. Okay, great. So, hello to everyone, and I'm very happy of welcoming you to this new semi-salon series. And well, I just wanted to say a few words. First of all, that we are all very happy and excited of having this new meeting, because we have managed to gather a very nice team of semioticians and friends, and I can assure you that it is going to be a very memorable series. So you can actually watch the whole program of the series in our Facebook page. Maybe it is not already up, but it will be, and you can follow it there, because we already have the whole program for the whole series. We will have 4 sessions. So today Tyler and Ľudmila will be speaking, but then we will have 6 more semioticians, so 3 more sessions, and yeah, they will be great. So they will. and just very quickly about the topic of this semi-salon. Originally, we wanted to have this topic for last semester series, but Tyler and I, we thought that it was not yet ready. So we had some discussions, and we finally proposed some points for our presenters to discuss and to think along with us. And yeah, we really hope that by the end of this series, we will gain some new insights and some new understandings about well, semiotics. So
And transmutation.
And transmutation indeed. But basically, our concerns, they had to do with how to read semiology at the light of the current developments of semiotic theory. So how to provide a productive reading of the works of Saussure and Hjelmslev and Prieto and other semiologists, so-called. And of course, that made us rethink the place of language within other science systems. And so the role of transmutation is somewhere there. But I will not speak too much because I will let our presenters tell us the whole story. So yeah, remember that we are going to have these sessions every Thursday, every second Thursday. At the same time, at 7 Tartu time. Yes, this session is being recorded. So if you turn on your camera, we will just take it for granted that you don't mind to be in the recording, unless you tell us otherwise. So yeah, and we will. You can ask questions to the presenters, but we will have them at the end. So we will have first presentations, both presentations, and then at the end we will have the questions. But you can write them at the chat at any time, or yeah, if you want, you can turn on your mic and speak. And yes, so I think that is all on my side, and I will leave you with Ľudmila Lacková, who honored us with presenting today. And she's going to talk about form and substance, a non-orthodox reading of Hjelmslev's semiotics. So, Ľudmila, please.
Thank you very much, Israel. So can I share my screen?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so let me go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
So Israel already introduced the topic of the semiotics series, but I also prepared a very short introduction because I am currently at a Texas Tech University, the Pears Institute for Studies in Pragmatism, and I have here an access to also all manuscripts by Pears. So I scanned for you this entry from the Century Dictionary, this famous encyclopedia of which Pears was one of the authors. As you know, after that, he lost his position at Johns Hopkins University. One of the few academic employment Pears had was constructing entries for this encyclopedia. And this entry is, of course, for the semiotics topic. So the definition by Pears of transmutation is that transmutation is simply a change into another substance, form, or nature. And here, form and substance are put together without any problem. As you know, for Pears, the notions of form and substance were not that important, but it is the contrary case for the structuralist semiology. And actually, the whole topic of my presentation will be to question what happens with substance and what happens with form during the act of transmutation or translation. So you know that these notions come from Roman Jakobson, and he actually distinguished three types of translation. Transmutation is only one of the three types of semiotic translation for Jakobson. So he distinguished interlingual translation, which is rewarding, or an interpretation of verbal signs into other verbal sign within the very same language. Then he distinguished interlingual translation or the translation proper. And the very last type of translation is the transmutation. And Jacobson's definition of transmutation is that it is an interpretation of verbal signs by means of sense of non-verbal sense systems. So it is obvious here that the role of logocentrism in transmutation is somehow crucial for Jacobson. And I have understood that the very goal of this semi-song is to question the role of logocentrism in transmutation. So I will also try to do so. But before I develop further on this topic, I have some examples for you of what actually translation and transmutation is. So interlingual translation is simply what you imagine by it, a translation from one language to another, for example, from English to Japanese. And I will give you more interlingual translation examples because most of all I'm a linguist and I work at the Department of General Linguistics. But what I want to say is that interlingual translation doesn't have to be necessarily limited to verbal language. But if we want to deliberate ourselves from the very logocentric definition by Jacobson, we can also say that there can be an interlingual translation in other semiotic systems. For instance, when we translate a visual sign into another visual sign. And this is my example of such an interlingual visual translation. It's a picture from an exhibition from Vienna Kunsthistorische Museum. It was in 2018, from the times where museums were still open. And it was a very nice exhibition. The name was Shape of Time. And the main idea of this exhibition was to present couples of paintings or even statues or other pieces of art, and which express the very same topic or the same idea. And of course, as the name already tells it, Shape of Time, the main focus was on the comparison between ancient arts and modern or contemporary art. So, in this picture, you can see on the left side a painting by 16th century Italian painter Tintoretto, and it is entitled Susanna and the Elders. The painting narrates a biblical story from the book of Daniel, the story of Susanna, of this Jewish wife, as she was taking her bath in her garden, and the two elders was spying on her as she was having her bath.
Screenshot.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. And so the story goes on that the two elders feel lust for Susanna, and when she finishes her bath, they accost her, they demand her to have sex with them. And when she refuses, they decide to accuse her falsely from having sex with another young man in her garden. And the story finishes that the two elders are put to death and the virtue triumphs. So this is the moral of the story. And on the right part of the photo, you can see the transmutated or translated, let's say, version of the same idea, which is a spying on a naked woman taking a bath. So the curator of this exhibition decided to put the two paintings together because of sharing the very same motive. And of course, there are differences, for instance, and which is very interesting in this case, from the compositional or enunciative perspective, the Tintoretto's painting is approached from the third person perspective, while you can see the elders like from the third-person viewpoint watching at Susanna. But in the second picture by James Marshall, the contemporary American artist, you can see the same motive from the first-person perspective. And it is even emphasized by the fact that you can see the window frame like limiting the observer's viewpoint. Okay, so this was just to illustrate how actually an interlingual translation can exist even within the visual arts or within any kind of semiotic system. And staying in the very same topic, I have an example of a real transmutation, like the passing from one sense system to another sense system, and this is a poem by Wallace Stevens. And don't get confused by the title, because Peter Quince is a character from Shakespeare, but actually this poem narrates the very story of Susanna and the others as represented in Tintoretto's painting. So I can just read the very beginning of the poem, the very few verses, because it's a very, very nice poem. Just as my fingers on these keys make music, so the self-same sounds on my spirit make music too. Music is feeling, then not sound, and thus it is what I feel here in this room, desiring you. Thinking of your blue-shadowed silk is music. It is like the strain walked in the elders by Susanna. And the poem goes on, narrating the very story of Susanna and the elders. It is a narrative poem, but of course, the very idea of the poem goes beyond the pure story, the biblical story. And actually, the main idea of the poem is to express what beauty is, and that beauty is not something abstract or Platonic, but Stevens says that a beauty is momentary in the mind. And this is an added value to the biblical story. This is an added value which the transmutated result of the transmutation brings. And well, this is my idea, and I will conclude my presentation with a try to theoretically substantiate the claim that during the translation or even transmutation, a new signification is created. And to conclude this part, one more literary example from the same topic. This is my very most favorite novel by Rob Gray, Jealousy. And we can comprehend it as a literary transmutation of the second painting by TylerJames Marshall, because actually the novel Jealousy is narrated from the first person perspective, and the motive is still the same, spying on a beautiful woman. And in this case, in this novel, the spying or the observer's viewpoint is somehow emphasized by the fact that he is observing through the window blinds, which is similar to the frame of the window from the painting of Marshall. So this is a perfect example of the transmutation of the visual into narrative. In fact, Rob Gray's novels are often described as visual, and it is because of it lacks the very plot. There is no plot, just the narrative transmutation of the visual. So as I already mentioned, well, my idea is that during the translation or transmutation, there is always something lost, but also on the other hand, something new is created. some words are untranslatable from one language to another. And this is, of course, why we also have the figure of speech lost in translation. And my question is, like, what is lost and what is created, how we can approach this theoretically, how it can be described with a theoretical semiotic background. So finally, I can go into the very topic of my presentation, to the Danish linguist Louis Hjelmslev. And if you don't know him, I can just say a few words about him. So he was the founder of the so-called Linguistic Circle of Copenhagen, or Copenhagen Language School. And he named his linguistic theory as glossematics. Is in any other structuralist movement in linguistics. Also, glossematics was inspired by Ferdinand de Saussure, and Hjelmslev is famous mostly for his re-elaboration or extension of the original Saussurean sign model. From the original two components of the sign model by de Saussure, which are signifier and signified, Hjelmslev made four components of his sign model. It is not actually a sign model, but it is more like model of the whole linguistic system. But still, we have the four basic components: expression, content, and substance, form. I don't want to go very deeply in the theory, but this part is crucial for my presentation, so I apologize for this little technical introduction. This figure is actually better to illustrate Hjelmslev model. It is somehow artificial, and it is not very exact, but I took it from this paper by Zingale from 2016. And I have chosen it because I think it is very illustrative. In that, it corresponds to the original de Saussure sign model because it has the notorious oval shape divided by this horizontal line into two parts, which are expression and content, and it is supposed to correspond to the de Saussure signifier and signified. But then you can see that it is further divided for each of expression and content part into substance and form, so that we have the substance of expression, form of expression, and we have form of the content and substance of the content. Also, what is important here is the order. So if you pay attention, we have the two forms closer to the horizontal line, while the two substances are closer like to the very circle. And this is supposed to express some kind of hierarchy. So Hjelmslevian model is hierarchical. The first hierarchy, of course, is between the two couples of terms. The first couple, expression and content, should stay on a higher level compared to the second couple, form and substance. And this is expressed in this figure. And then, according to Hjelmslev, or at least as he wrote in Prolegomena, we have another hierarchy between substance and form. And this hierarchy expresses the order of determination, so that would be that the form determines the substance. And I didn't comment on the very last part of this figure, the purport, supposed to be a semiotically amorphous method. And I think it is important to also comment on this because we shouldn't we shouldn't take for granted that substance is the matter, because it's not like this in Hjelmslev. He has another word for describing the let's say referent or the amorphous matter, which is outside of the very signed function, and so he used the word purport for that. So while we more or less understand what is expression and content in Hjelmslev, we can equal these two terms to signifier and signified, even if, of course, it's not very precise, but let's say we can work with this. When it comes to substance and form, it is somehow more complicated to describe what Hjelmslev meant by substance and by form. So if we want to stay in the Saussure, we could say that form is linguistic form. That would be langue for Saussure, and substance could be the parole. But of course, it is not precisely like this. And moreover, it is very complicated to imagine what he meant by substance of expression and substance of content. Because we can imagine the substance of expression is the phonological material, is the phonemes, not very articulatory or acoustic characteristic of the sounds, but rather the phonemes itself within the linguistic system. But when it comes to the substance of the content, it is already more complicated. This is Tyler's definition of the substance as the outside of the inside. And I like very much this definition. I think this is what really Hjelmslev meant by substance, to differentiate it from the purport. And yes, so my talk was inspired by Tyler's dissertation, so we will encounter more quotes from his dissertation from now on. But now I would like to comment a bit on the substance of content. So because I find this the most difficult part of the whole Hjelmslevian schema. And actually, it is not in Prolegomena that we can really understand what he meant by substance of content, but in other of his writings. This one is from Last Ratification du Langage, and I have chosen this example of elephant. For those of you who knows Last Ratification du Langage, you know already where I am aiming. But since this essay was not translated into English, I will try to explain a little bit. So in this part of the essay, Hjelmslev describes what is substance of content with aid of interlingual translation. So he uses the Russian word slon, meaning elephant, to describe what he means by substances of content, and to claim that actually we have more substances of content, and every specific language has its own substance of content. For instance, when it comes to the word elephant, it has a very different substance of content for the speakers of African languages or for the speakers from India. And it has a different substance of content for European speakers who mostly associate elephant with circuses or zoological gardens, etc. And moreover, Hjelmslev says that when we are defining the substance of the content, we have to bear in mind the connection to other cultural artifacts or to other cultural semiotic systems. So that means that the content of the language and its substance cannot be divided from the very culture of the language or of the speaker's community. And this is to say that every specific language is divided differently at the level of substance of the content, which he also claimed in Prolegomena. And in Prolegomena, this very claim that substance is subdivided differently in different languages by form is important for the rest of my talk. There are two observations to be made. The first one is that substance is subdivided differently. That is what was illustrated by the example of the elephant, is subdivided differently in different languages, in connection to the culture, etc. And the second observation to be made is that the substance is divided differently by form. So here you can see the very hierarchy between form and substance as expressed in Prolegomena. So this was about the substance. And now when it comes to form, how can we actually imagine the form of the content? This is, I forgot. This is another quote from Tyler's dissertation about the logocentrism. Logocentrism, according to Tyler, is rather the belief that the signified has a natural bond with the referent, and that while different signifiers are used in different languages, the signifieds to which these signifiers are correlated are the same for everyone across all cultures. Right, so when we go back to the elephant example, this is a perfect illustration of that Hjelmslev was actually not logocentric, because it corresponds to this definition of logocentrism, where we have different signifieds for different languages, and those are detached somehow from the very referent. There is no natural bond between the elephant as some kind of natural object and the way how different languages have subdivided the form of the content, which is semantics, actually. And why Hjelmslev chooses elephant is because of that he wants to say that it is not only abstract phenomena such as good, evil, morality that are approached differently in different languages and different cultures, but it is the very natural objects as trees or plants or animals. So here is another example of such a natural, a different approach to natural phenomena when it comes to the content. And this example is from Prolegomena. It is any more example to demonstrate or illustrate the substance of the content, but this time is illustrating the form. That's why we have this schema, like divided by the horizontal vertical lines. This kind of a table should represent the very form of the content. So exactly as we can imagine the form of the expression as like some schema where the phonemes are disposed, this is the same for the form of the content, where we have some semantic content. And in this example, he uses the Danish, German, and French expressions for tree or wood, or how can I translate it in English? So as you can see, the Danish word træ corresponds partially to German Baum and Holz, and it corresponds to the French arbre and not that much to the French bois, while the Danish word skof corresponds to both German Holz and Wald, and as well it corresponds to the French forêt and bois. But then the correspondence is different, and when we pass from Danish through German to French, there will somehow be some parts lost, or the correspondence is not perfect. And so here my question is how it can be that the form determines the substance if a substance is determined culturally or is not separable from cultural artifacts, as Hjelmslev stated in La stratification du langage. And I have another example. This one is made by myself. It is about the translation from Japanese to English and Czech. So I was inspired because one of my friends defended a PhD dissertation about this Japanese word kokoro, which is very hardly translatable into English, for instance. And so Japanese is so complicated language when we want to translate to English. So I had to add not only the horizontal lines, but also the vertical lines to cover all the semantic space of kokoro. And it simply means heart. It is very nice because also the original Japanese ideogram has this like a heart shape, but also it means mind, spirit, soul, and the related contents. And you can say that the transition from English to Czech, it's not that different, but when it comes to Japanese, we have difficulties to find the correspondences. I think that this word kokoro is so interesting, and the whole dissertation thesis of my friend was only focused on this one word, because it starts to be interesting when put into correlation with other languages, when it is in the context of interlingual translation. So my observation here is that it probably wouldn't be that interesting if we translated it in another language, not into language, but let's say some closer language to Japanese, for instance, Chinese. And this means that form of the content of a language is actually dependent upon the interlingual translation, or it is not stable, because it would be different if we put different languages here in this schema, right? So my conclusion is that the form of the content, but not only of the content, but form in general, is somehow elusive. It is ephemeral or subject to change. And so if form is elusive and subject to change, how it can actually determine the substance once again. Hjelmslev himself was interested in this question, and he expressed this very complicated relation between form and substance in his essay, Langue et Parole, where he tried to take the original Saussurean dichotomy between langue and parole and re-elaborated it into three terms, actually. So he passed from the binary opposition to some kind of triadic set of relations between a scheme, norm, and usage, where he defined scheme as pure form, norm as material form, and usage of set of habits. So this is already interesting like that he canceled simply the original binary opposition by de Saussure, meaning that the relation between form and substance is not that binaristic or exclusive. But moreover, in this essay, he also comments on the direction of the determination. And he says that actually it is the other way around. And it is that the schema is determined by norm, by the material form, which is on its part determined by usage. And usage is something which is the closest to the substance. Okay, I will try to speed up a bit. Just a very brief remark that Prieto was also very fascinated by this essay of Hjelmslev, and he dedicated the whole chapter 3 of his Pertinence Hepatic to the essay by Hjelmslev. So somehow when we read Prieto, we also get impression that it is very contradictory in Hjelmslev, his approach to substance and form. So on one hand, Prieto defined it himself as anti-substantialist, but on the other hand, he also says that when we talk about commutation, it is only seemingly that we avoid substance. And so commutation is change of the substances of the one and the same form when we try to divide variants from invariants. And of course, substance is very important for commutation. So we cannot actually say that Hjelmslev is anti-substantialist at some point. And now I would like to develop on this idea of the contradictory position of Hjelmslev and go in the direction of langue et parole, where Hjelmslev very implicitly, but still claim that substance can be in the dominant position towards the form. And to demonstrate this, I go once again into visual arts, because in the visual arts it is where we very explicitly communicate through the substance. So I will show you this video installation by American artist Bill Villa, who is famous thanks to his video installations, transmutations of ancient paintings. And here you can see his installation called The Greeting, which was inspired by 16th century Italian artist Tintoretto.
I'll tell you a story.
This painting by Tintoretto represents the Virgin Mary as she encounters with her cousin, and both of the women are pregnant. And the video installation was made as some kind of transmutation of this painting, but I would like to show you the commentary of the artist, of Bill Villa. I found in an interview with him because I think it's important for the topic of transmutation. It is very short.
Okay, I was sort of getting a little bit interested in the Renaissance, but not that deeply, because I was much more interested in going forward with this new medium of video and keeping going in that direction. I was in the car driving to my studio one day, and there were 3 women on the street corner, and I arrived and had to stop for the cross traffic. And so these women were just coming back from their lunch break in the afternoon. So they were walking right in front of me on the other side of the street. And it was windy. And so as they started to go across the street, the wind came up and their dresses were kind of moving, their clothes were moving as they were passing by me like this. And I was in this, of course, sealed capsule of a car, you know, so I was like the outside observer, perfect position, be looking at things. And I just watched them go across and go away. And then the light changed. And first thing I did was when I got to the studio, I raced back, opened the door, and walked right to the book I had on Pontormo. And I opened it up, and there it was, exactly the same thing that I had seen from the Renaissance, right? Unbelievably a lot. You know, how we can see things in this world, but not really see them. But there's another part of us that sees them, but they don't see with this kind of light and this kind of eyes. They see with the inner light, which is your emotions and the part of you, the feelings. The feelings, when you see a beautiful painting, you get moved, you know, it's so deep, you know. And that's the realization I made, that I've been doing that all my life with all these pieces I was making, but I just didn't have a word for what I was doing.
So besides this final comment on the logocentrism, as he claims that he didn't have the words, but he could explain it by the visual, like moving pictures. What I find interesting in this interview with Viola is that he decided to do the transmutation of the painting into the moving pictures, not because he really was doing the transmutation of the form, but what he took inspiration from was the substance, as he was describing his experience as he was in the car and observing the moving images. And then he got the inspiration, to which only after that he assigned the form, and he found out that the form is very similar to the form of the Contormos picture. Okay, so, oops. Going back to Hjelmslev and to the last ratification du langage, we can take a Hjelmslevian notion of the only substance. He defines substance, you can remember the elephant example, as having integral character of the content of a language. That means that the substance is somehow inclusive for all the languages, but moreover, it includes within it, within the very substance of the content, also the substance of expression is included. And besides that, even the form, or yes, forms both of content and expression. So this is my idea how to approach the problem of substance and form, and not to seeing them as in exclusive binary opposition, but rather in some relation of inclusion, where the substance is in the dominant position and substance is including the forms both of expression and of content. And this brings me to another theory by Hjelmslev, the participation law. Not very famous, but really interesting. So the crucial idea of this theory is that the language cannot be really limited to the binary exclusive opposition, where we have two terms in opposition, like A and non-A, but rather a language is a system of opposition, which he calls participative oppositions. And this participative opposition has the formula of A versus A plus non-A, where A plus non-A is actually the inclusive part of both A and non-A. And to illustrate this, you can imagine the two terms in opposition as term 1 and term 2, where the second term is inclusive and the term 1 is exclusive. So the fields A, B, and C are like positive, negative, and neuter. So this means that two terms entering into a participative opposition can occupy the three positions. It can be positive, negative, or neuter. For instance, the classical opposition man, woman is an example of participative opposition, because in the context of the sentence like all men are wise, you actually have the lexeme of man occupying all the three positions. It can be both man, woman, it can be also some transgender individual. But in other contexts, of course, the word man would only express the male sex. Another figure, this one is taken from the Czech linguist Miloš Dokulil. This is just to show you that a very inclusive term, A plus non-A, would occupy the whole space, the whole semantic space of both term A and A bare, which is contrary to A, and also the contradictory non-A. And there is actually no exclusive opposition, but the opposition is inclusive. That is why the inner or smaller circles are included in the bigger circle, which is actually the inclusive term. And my idea is to apply this participative opposition to form and substance, so that form and substance are in the relation of participative opposition and not exclusive. And that we can say that form participates on substance, or that the substance includes form, as was already implied in La stratification du langage by Hjelmslev himself. But moreover, not only form participates on substance, but we can say that substance in certain contexts can determine the form, as was already implied in langue et parole, this reversed order of determination. And my last question is, what is the character of this determination of substance upon the form? So I can finally go to Tyler's black pyramid schema. It is expressing the hybrid of Peirce and Hjelmslev, and as you can see, it's very complex. So I'm only going to focus on the inner part of the scheme, where the Hjelmslevian terminology is used, and it is divided by the horizontal line into primary and secondary level. Well, the primary level, we can see the classical action of the form upon the substance, both of the form of the signified upon the substance of the signifier, and vice versa. And in the upper part, you can see the reversed order of the action of the substance upon the form. So again, of the substance of signifier upon the form of the signified, and vice versa. This action of substance upon the form has attribute of being retroactive. It is a retroactive action of the substance upon the form, and it is retroactive, of course, because the primary direction, as Hjelmslev expressed in Prolegomena, is of form upon the substance. So just two quotes by Tyler of what it actually is, the retroactivity. And he uses this notion from Grimes and Curte's Encyclopedia of Reciprocal Presupposition. So reciprocal presupposition suggests that form may also presuppose substance. And this idea is crucial. It is this reversal of the order of priority in the presupposition that is the technical definition given for retroactivity. And another quotation, which I find very important. The major point of the Black Pyramid schema is to show how circularity between primary and secondary levels necessitates retroactivity at the secondary level. Retroactivity enacts contradiction, forcing the reassignation of signifiers to signifieds through the generation of habit change interpretants, etc. So my conclusion about the translation and transmutation, change of substance in the context of the Black Pyramid schema is that in the process of translation or transmutation, first, the substance is changed into another substance, and consequently, a new signification is created. And this new signification is created by means of retroactivity of substance upon form. And all this is possible thanks to the detachment of the sign from the object reference. And I am going to conclude with one more example from the Vienna exhibition, The Shape of Art. This one is a couple of paintings by Rembrandt, a self-portrait, and a flat portrait by Rothko. So according to the curator of the exhibition, the two paintings share more than just a somber palette. And of course, it is a great idea of the expression of the retroactivity of substance upon the form. Actually, I was consulting this presentation with my sister, who is an art historian, and she told me that I shouldn't be doing this. She told me this is not a good example for my presentation because it was not intentional action of the artist to transmute the Rembrandt self-portrait, of course. It was by the action of the curator to assemble the two paintings together. And his choice was, to some extent, it was random, because he could have coupled any other piece of art with the Rembrandt self-portrait. But once he decided for this one, and as I thought it was to some extent random or arbitrary, the new meaning was created for the scopes of the exhibition. And well, I think this is the example of the actual retroactivity of the substance upon the form. And it is an example of the non-identity of the sign with the object reference, because of course there is no shared object reference. And the very action of the curator was arbitrary, and there is no causal relation between the two paintings. In all of the examples that I used, I chose them trying to demonstrate this detachment of the sign from the object referent, as it was in the Bill Viola video presentation, because actually it was not the Virgin Mary that he depicted, but it was some random women. And it is also the case of the Japanese word kokoro, because in the interlingual translation, there is actually the referent being detached from the sign when we are translating from one language to another. So I think that I took too much time, so I will stop here, and I will just show you my references. I have some more examples, but I already told all the important part. So thank you very much, and sorry I took too long.
Yeah, don't worry about the time. It's very good. But yeah, so then we can just pass to Tyler.
Well, the question is brilliant presentation, of course, absolutely breathtakingly brilliant. But do we take a break? Shall we take a break? Is 7-minute break? What do you think, Israel? Or do we just keep going?
We can just keep going.
Keep going. Okay, we just keep going. That's fine. presentation is going to be a little shorter, actually. So yeah, it's good to just keep going. I'll share screen. Another thing, though, just to remind the listeners, how many listeners do we have right now? Israel, manager? How many listeners are there?
38.
38. To remind our 38 listeners, though, you have questions for Ľudmila, no doubt, and you can type them now into the chat, just so that you don't forget them and that we have them in the correct order and so on. But we're going to deal with all the questions at the end. But, you know, we're just going to monopolize the discussion anyway and not listen to any of your questions. So don't bother. Everyone can see full screen? Yeah. Thank you very much. Reminder that we are still recording. At the end, when we do discussion, though, it's going to be nice if everybody turns on their cameras, but don't if you don't want to be recorded. And also, if any of you out there in cyberspace want to take screenshots at any point and then send us the screenshots, it'll be very useful for our Instagram account. And I'll post the link to the Instagram account in addition to a number of other links so that you can find them and help us with our self-promotion. And maybe there will be no lag. Maybe this will be the first online presentation in the history of online presentations where there were no technical difficulties. But now that I say it, of course, it will happen. So be prepared for that. And if there is an interruption in the connection, just be patient while we reconnect. My talk is called Rosetta Stoned, the Alphabet, the Goddess, and Schizoanalysis. The title of my talk refers to a book by Leonard Shlain called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. Schlain's thesis has to do with the concept of logocentrism. And in my dissertation, I argue that logocentrism and its critique is misconceived. And my Peirce-Hjelmslev hybrid, which Ľudmila mentioned, and my black pyramid schema is, among other things, a way of dealing with real logocentrism. So we'll talk about naive logocentrism in Schlain's book, the advanced critique of logocentrism in Derrida, Deleuze, and Guattari. And then at the end, we will return to the place of Hjelmslev in this picture and the prospects of synthesizing the radical Hjelmslevian critique of logocentrism with a more domesticated semiotics, as I propose to do in my dissertation. So today there is this watered down, popularized account of what is logocentrism. And in my view, Schlain's book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, is the perfect emblem of this wrong view. The idea is just that verbal language lends dominance to certain cognitive functions at the expense of other ones. And this probably or possibly gives an advantage to people whose brains are more inclined to use language. Schlain crucially goes a step further to say that the use of alphabetic language in culture puts women specifically at a disadvantage to men. So now you see here how we are already entering into some problematic territory. However, on the very basic claim of a symbolic representational matrix that by its very structure reproduces certain forms of domination on this claim, my inclination is to say yes. And thus I have no real problem with the claim put forward already on the first page of Schlehn's book. That is, quote, every society that has acquired alphabet literacy has become violently self-destructive a short time afterward. This madness has been associated with a virulent misogyny and spelled trouble for images, women's rights, goddesses, and right brain values. I have no problem with this claim in principle, even though there is no way this claim can be verified, and on top of that, how the whole right brain, left brain, hemispheric lateralization has been largely debunked. And of course, the biggest problem that the association of right brain cognitive functions with women per se is widely challenged. We will just leave these matters aside for now and focus on what I see to be the actual and serious flaw with Schlehn's book, because it is by focusing upon this flaw that we may understand and acquire the tools for fighting real logocentrism, which semiotics provides us. The subtitle of the book gives us a clue right away about what this serious flaw is with his work. That is, the conflict between image and word. So when Schlehn writes, quote, every time there has been a great advance in science and knowledge assisted by alphabet literacy, it has been associated with war, he is not just blaming language. He is also saying that the attendant decline in visual communication also leads to war. Further, when he writes that, quote, whenever the alphabet appears, so too does madness, he is saying that it is the decline of the visual that leads to madness, not just the presence of the alphabetical. Problems arise here regarding the obviously visual aspect of written language as text on the printed page. Also, Schlehn claims that visual communication and cognitive processing favors women, but as even he briefly acknowledges in his introduction, studies do not entirely support the idea that women are more inclined to visual communication than men. Some studies show the opposite. Nevertheless, his argument proceeds upon this assumption that language use decreases visual communication, that women are predisposed toward the visual and men away from it, and finally that today's developments in visual communication through television and computer screens is a herald of a brave new future after alphabets will be defeated, a post-logocentric and thus post-patriarchal future. Referring to the learning disorder of dyslexia as a natural reaction to logocentric culture, Schlehn predicts that, quote, as culture becomes more comfortable with its reliance on images, it may turn out that dyslexia will be reassessed as another of the many harbingers that announced the arrival of the iconic revolution. I read this passage with a tone of sarcasm because I do have serious problems with the whole idea of this iconic revolution, but I will again concede that his general claim that developments in telecommunications today are an indication of a techno-evolutionary event horizon of huge importance. This claim is incontestable as far as I am concerned. But I do still have this problem with the claim that multimedia visual communication itself will somehow save us from patriarchy and perdition, and that the old printed page is a relic of a bygone age that ought to be done away with as soon as possible. Indeed, on this point, some will tell you, many will tell you, that, for example, semiology, structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction, and other linguistics-oriented branches of semiotics are themselves logocentric, and that they are therefore part of the problem because of their interest in language. A major claim of my dissertation, and one which I am stressing here, is that this disavowal of semiology and structuralism is a mistake. But you see, in this connection how the replacement of language with images is not an effective strategy of fighting logocentrism, because images can also be logocentric. It is upon this basis that we can easily dismiss the common idea that multimedia brings any quick and easy solutions to this problem. Unfortunately, though, the way in which Schlein's book falls prey to this mistake is actually quite entertaining. Take, for instance, his statement that the internet will solve all the problems of sexism and misogyny in popular culture. In the context of the late 90s appearance of personal computers, he writes that, quote, "After a time, thanks to the internet, I predict culture will adjust and sexuality's place in culture will eventually reach a healthy equilibrium." But even beyond the more obvious stupidities such as these, there is another, even more entertaining way in which Schlein's book exhibits its own logocentrism. And this is very instructive for us, for understanding logocentrism's true nature, the way that it manifests in any modality, including the visual, and the tools that semiotics gives us for fighting it. Moving from early Christian history through Roman times, the Dark Ages, medieval times, the Renaissance, and the Reformation, and blasting through modern history, Schlein selects some of the sauciest historical periods and dwells on them at great length. He gives special attention to the heights of Roman brutality, torture and mayhem during the Inquisition, and the burning of witches in the 15th century, not restraining himself by any means to a dry account of dates, facts, and statistics. He gives vivid visual retellings, such as, for example, one particularly detailed account of the witch burning trials in chapter 32, which I found to be a bit gratuitous, to say the least. And all the while, of course, the reader is following his narrative and sympathizing with the suffering characters and thinking, yeah, damn alphabets. In addition to gratuitous violence, though, the effect of alphabet literacy, specifically upon human sexuality, also provides Schlein with some interesting or entertaining narrative possibilities. During his accounts of early Christian history and then the later Reformation, Schlein associates the practice of male celibacy with alphabetic literacy as a way of denigrating women. But in what seems to be his favorite historical period, that is the late 15th and early 16th century, this correlation is reversed. During this period, rather, sexual indulgence and decadence become the index of alphabet domination. As he writes, quote, "The principal Renaissance popes of the period, Sixtus IV, Innocent VII, Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, Julian II, Leo X, and Clement V, engaged in activities and made decisions that, taken as a whole, constitute one of the most dramatic examples of sustained folly in human history." And much like the retelling of the stories of the witch burnings, these graphic summaries make for a pretty good reading. No doubt this very graphic, selective, and visual aspect of his book contributes to the fact that it was indeed a bestseller in the United States of 1998. Incidentally, these portions remind me of some of these recent television productions like Showtime's Tudors, which was about Henry VIII's many exploits. Or better yet, another one of Showtime's programs, The Borgias. Yes, I have watched these shows. Yes, I enjoy these shows. But during these parts, Schlein's book is such a page turner that one barely pauses to question, again, the substance of this correlation between alphabetic literacy on the one hand and the excesses of these lusty popes and cardinals on the other. One reads on, quote, "Alexander's, that is Rodrigo Borgia's, bacchanals were the talk of Christendom. 50 courtesans danced after dinner with the guests, at first clothed, then naked. Candelabra were then placed on the floor and chestnuts scattered among them. The courtesans, still naked, crawled on their hands and knees among the burning candles to retrieve the chestnuts in invented ways, while the Pope, Cesar, and his sister Lucrezia looked on. I'm turning the pages, I'm nodding, and as I read, I see, very interesting, those damned alphabets. The side point here is that it's clear that Schlein is trying to be edgy and contemporary by including all this graphic sex and violence. But when it comes to the actual fight against logocentrism as such, things get a whole lot more edgy than Schlein is probably ready to deal with. When you start dealing with what I call total destratification, things get dangerously edgy indeed. But we'll get to that later. For now, when it comes to his visual writing style, you may disagree with me here by pointing out that, well, Schlein's book is not really visual communication, obviously, because it is still in the format of printed type. And so this example does not support my point that visual communication may also be logocentric. However, this leads me to the next part of my presentation, which is the more difficult part, to understand the logocentric aspect of the message, regardless of its modality, visual, auditory, or what have you, has to do with its uncritical representation of the referent. So I argue that Schlein's visual realism is uncritical in just this way, but now we move away from Schlein's book to more serious material in pursuit of the real definition of logocentrism. As Ľudmila already told you, the real definition of logocentrism is a major concern of my recently published and defended dissertation, and there I engaged with the texts of Jacques Derrida directly and at length. And in my first chapter, I quote him, or I'm quoting my first chapter, and this quote actually, this is a quote that Ľudmila already gave. That is, logocentrism is the belief that the signified has a natural bond with the referent, and that while different signifiers are used in different languages, the signifieds to which these signifiers are correlated are the same for everyone across all cultures. And I point this out in my dissertation. I try to make it as clear as possible, because it should go without saying that the signifier does not provide us with the referent. One person speaks Spanish, another Estonian, a third only English, and each uses different signifiers for presumably the same thing, but the relationship of the signified to the referent is a more difficult question. Do we each have the same mental content? Are the differing signifiers that we each respectively use referring to the same content? Is there a universal mental content independent of language? Do the signifieds have a privileged bond to the referent? To answer yes, there is a mental content that is the same for all of us independent of language. This is logocentrism. And more complicatedly, there are certain conventions that reflect a logocentric outlook. One may call them realist conventions. Deleuze and Guattari call them representationalist conventions, but more about that later. For now, you may see simply how a painting or other visual communication may adhere to these conventions, or it may not, just in the same way as a written text may be representationalist, and it may not. My argument is that Schlein's book is logocentric in this way, and Derrida's book is not. So in the same way as images may be logocentric and non-logocentric, also some writing is logocentric and some writing is not. So when it comes to logocentric writing, Derrida explains that, quote, the system of language associated with phonetic alphabetic writing is that within which logocentric metaphysics, determining the sense of being as presence, has been produced. Limiting the internal system of language in general by a bad abstraction, it prevents Saussure and the majority of his successors from determining fully and explicitly that which is called the integral and concrete object of linguistics. So try to understand. The characters of alphabetic language reproduce the sounds of speech, unlike some ideogrammatic languages, for example, whose parts are not bound to this bad abstraction. Because of their dependence upon speech, Derrida argues that alphabetic language reinforces a notion of truth through presence in the voice. And in the logocentric view, meaning is in this way guaranteed by the linguistic identity of the speaker. The argument is that not only may there be a non-logocentric writing, but this writing itself, this non-logocentric writing, which is more or less the topic of Derrida's book, and for which Derrida's book stands as a colossal exemplar, the major exemplar. This writing itself, according to these fellows, is the most effective way of getting to the heart of logocentrism in every modality, written or otherwise. This is also the claim of Deleuze and Guattari, that semiotics itself may be conceived as a kind of anti-representationalist writing designed to fight logocentrism. And it is Deleuze and Guattari who no doubt have achieved the most lasting and impactful expression of this vision. It is a vision which is nevertheless quite difficult to understand. The style of this non-logocentric anti-representationalist writing is one that cannot be learned by imitation. As Deleuze and Guattari say, quote, "That is what style is, or rather the absence of style, asyntactic, agrammatical. The moment when language is no longer defined by what it says, even less by what makes it a signifying thing, but by what causes it to move, to flow, and to explode, desire. For literature is like schizophrenia, a process and not a goal, a production and not an expression." Like Derrida and Julia Kristeva before them, Deleuze and Guattari point to the usual suspects, Marcel Proust, James Joyce, and especially Samuel Beckett. But such strategy of mentioning is also ineffective. These authors have also been canonized. They have also been absorbed into the mainstream. They themselves have become the convention of great literature, so to speak. Another point is to stress that this writing is not restricted to literature, but may also be found within theoretical and scientific writing. That is, Deleuze and Guattari's writing and Derrida and Kristeva's own writing is not just about the non-logocentric anti-representationalist writing. It is this writing, and crucially, any work that presumes to discuss this writing must also be a demonstration of this writing. And I uphold again that classically, at least from the Parisian view, this is precisely what semiotics as a discipline of writing was supposed to designate. Needless to say, Leonard Schleyn's book doesn't quite achieve this height of self-awareness, but we shouldn't be too hard on Schleyn because we agree with his basic thesis, and it is this thesis which, however imperfectly, explains why such anti-representationalist literature is necessary in the first place, even if it fails completely to realize this literature in its own style. Further, we shouldn't be too hard on Schleyn because, as Deleuze and Guattari write again, quote, "Every writer is a sellout. The only literature is that which places an explosive device in its package, fabricating a counterfeit currency, causing the superego and its form of expression to explode, as well as the market value of its form of content." From the vocabulary in this quote, that is form of expression, form of content, we also see again that it is Louis Hjelmslev who inspires Deleuze and Guattari's semiotics, in the very same way that it was also Hjelmslev who inspired Derrida's deconstruction in certain parts of it. You may respond now by saying, well, Deleuze and Guattari weren't semioticians, or Deleuze and Guattari weren't interested in deconstruction. And this is a common attitude. Their work is often actually described exactly as a critique and even a rejection of semiotics, deconstruction, and psychoanalysis. And perhaps the most useful thing that I can say to you aspiring young semioticians in the audience right now is that by understanding Hjelmslev as the theoretic foundation, we may also understand how semiotics subsumes deconstruction, schizo, and psychoanalysis, and may be perceived in this way with a more coherent disciplinary identity. In any case, Deleuze and Guattari do not reject semiotics. They repeat word for word the definition of logocentrism that Derrida already gave us, which is that in alphabetic language, truth is secured through being grounded by presence in the voice. Their words in Anti-Oedipus are as if peeled directly from the pages of grammatology. As they say, logocentric writing, quote, implies a use of language in general according to which graphism becomes aligned on the voice, but also overcodes it and induces a fictitious voice from on high that functions as a signifier. Whereas these non-representationalist writers like D.H. Lawrence, Marcel Proust, and Samuel Beckett, quote, possess a graphic system that is independent of the voice, a system that is not aligned on the voice and not subordinate to it, but connected to it, coordinated in an organization that is radiating, as it were, and multidimensional. Further, Derrida, as well as Deleuze and Guattari at the same time, equally remind us that images can also be logocentric. And so from their view, visual communication in multimedia is no guaranteed solution to the problem. And they describe their own goal, partially at least, as an attempt to purge from theory this logocentric imagery. And this is the real basis of what they call schizoanalysis. In their assault on logocentric imagery, Deleuze and Guattari go even deeper than the critique of race, class, and gender. And this is where things get really troubling, or edgy. This is where it gets edgy. So they are interested in finding something even more central to identity than these earlier categories. And the result is that their choice is that with schizoanalysis, they deconstruct the very notion of the nuclear family structure itself. So in chapter 4 of Anti-Oedipus, in some of the final pages of the book, they define schizoanalysis in this way, quote, the fundamental difference between psychoanalysis and schizoanalysis is the following. Schizoanalysis attains a non-figurative and non-symbolic unconscious, a pure abstract figural dimension, apprehended below the minimum conditions of identity. What are the minimum conditions of identity? Identity as structured by race, class, and gender is already obvious. From the beginnings of post-structuralism, it was already clear that these pillars should be the central targets of the critical project, and that their deconstruction is elementary to the achievement of non-identity. But Deleuze and Guattari want to take it a step further. This next step is one that most would-be progressives are not willing to take or even consider. And I emphasize this further step because it is only by contemplating such radical destratification that one can come to understand the real source of the dangerous mystique of semiotics. The theoretical argument from Deleuze and Guattari is that the so-called Oedipus complex may stand for the role of family-based repression and transference within psychoanalytic treatment. The psychoanalyst is likely to explain symptoms of the patient on the basis of the patient's relationship with their family, Deleuze and Guattari explain how the family then is like the actors or performers in a little tragic theater production, which is the same for everybody, just like the signified is supposed to be the same for everybody in logocentrism. In this way, old psychoanalysis remains representationalist, and the goal of schizoanalysis is to purge it of this privatized theater of the family. Deeper than race, deeper than class, deeper than gender, the family structure and its visual representation is the basis of real logocentrism, or so say Deleuze and Guattari. At this point in my argument, I like to rely upon the unmatched eloquence of Julia Christe to explain this process, how going through the experience of this crucible exposes the subject to impossible dangers, relinquishing his identity in rhythm, dissolving the buffer of reality in a mobile discontinuity, leaving the shelter of the family, the state, or religion. The commotion this practice creates spares nothing. It destroys all constancy to produce another, and then destroys that one as well. When we consider the direction that semiotics sometimes has taken towards embodiment wellness and feel-good philosophizing, like what Schlein does, or toward more romantic notions of simply getting back to nature, comments like this one from Kristeva should give us pause. Also, we must consider the meteoric rise of Deleuze and Guattari in the social sciences. They are perhaps the most cited authors in the trendy field of posthumanism, for example, even when they are concluding their most important works with a warning like, quote, schizoanalysis must devote itself with all its strength to the necessary destructions, destroying beliefs and representations, theatrical scenes, and when engaged in this task, no activity will be too malevolent. For the main part of my presentation, I would just close by saying that the dangerous mystique of the word semiotics is very real, but in order for that currency not to lose its luster, there has to be some accountability to what we may call the total destratification at the heart of the semiotic enterprise. But immediately I want to qualify this extremism. Moderation is advisable. Accountability does not preclude happy cooperation in instrumental projects and social initiatives. The major point of my dissertation was to show how after we fully understand the destratifying impulse, integration is still possible with scientific semiotics, for example. This is the whole ambition of my first Hjelmslev hybrid and Black Pyramid schema. With this in mind, I will read this quote from Deleuze and Guattari about the importance of Hjelmslev. And then to conclude, I will pose some questions about the legitimacy of the radical reading of Hjelmslev and the prospects for integration with Peirce. So this is from Hjelmslev. I mean, this is from Deleuze and Guattari about Hjelmslev, about why they love Hjelmslev. We believe that from all points of view and despite certain appearances, Louis Hjelmslev's linguistics abandons all privileged reference, because these figures have definitively lost the minimum conditions of identity that define the elements of the signifier itself. In short, Hjelmslev's very special position in linguistics and the reactions he provokes seem to be explained by the following: that he tends to fashion a purely immanent theory of language that shatters the double game of the voice graphism domination, that causes form and substance, content and expression to flow according to the flows of desire. So then, I have two general summary points and then two questions. The first point is that the critique of logocentrism is not reducible to the question of multimodality or multimedia, nor is the problem of logocentrism merely a problem of verbal language. The second point is that the primarily linguistic solution posed by semiotics for the problem of logocentrism is deeply implicated with total destratification. So then my first question is directed to everyone. or I suppose it's directed especially to those who read my dissertation or are aware of this first Hjelmslev hybrid here and may, I don't know, have thoughts about whether it's feasible. So this question is, to what extent may this whole Persian iconic turn of scientific semiotics be reconciled with the goals of deconstruction and schizoanalysis? And finally, my final question is directed at Ľudmila. As it regards Hjelmslev, it's also directed at our host Israel, too, expert in Hjelmslev and in Prieto. There's also named Louis, the other Louis. I ask you, Ľudmila and Israel, are there indications of radical destratification, as I describe it, already in Hjelmslev's own texts? Or further, regarding Prieto, Louis Prieto is Israel's main focus area in his PhD, and Prieto is a Hjelmslevian. Prieto has a definite political radicalism of his own, and so I guess the question is, is Prieto reading too much into Hjelmslev in the way that I do, or in the way that arguably Deleuze and Guattari do, or even Derrida already does when they emphasize this idea of either reciprocal presupposition or already this total destratification, as it's called in the late game. So I'm stopping the share screen and opening the floor to our 35 beautiful participants. And as long as you don't mind being recorded, then you should turn on your cameras.
Indeed, and you can. Okay, yeah, I guess I am. You can hear me, right? Yeah.
So yes, we
really bring all your questions. Now is the time to do it, because so after this almost 2 hours, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. And if there is not a question right now, there was already one in chat. Maybe we can start quickly with that. It was by Victoria. I hope she's still there. And the question was for Ľudmila. And the question was, what's the place of abstract concepts in Hjelmslev's theory, and how would he explain the meaning of adjectives or verbs? Not only.
Someone's saying I can't hear you in the chat, but I can hear you.
Yeah, well,
yeah, but I can hear you twice. Can you guys hear me? Yes. You can hear Israel, right? Okay. So let's just do contradict. Okay, yes, Ellie says yes.
Good.
Okay, so then what's your answer, Ľudmila, to Victoria?
Oh, okay. First of all, thank you for the question, Victoria. I'm sorry if it was not clear from my presentation. I somehow had difficulties to approach Hjelmslev in this rather short talk. Even at the end, it was not that short. But of course, Hjelmslev theory is like a theory for the whole linguistic system. As every structuralist theory from the first generation of semiology, they treated language as the whole system, where it is presupposed that it will include all the concrete and abstract notions, of course, at the level of the content. And what I tried to demonstrate with the example of elephant was that actually at the level of the substance of the content, we have different substances of semantics, different semantic substances, not only for the physical objects, physical natural objects, but as well as for the abstract contents or abstract entities. But I gave it for clear that of course, there are different substances for abstract notions because it is very culturally dependent. And I focus on the physical objects because this is more like tricky when it comes to different substances of content. And the second part of the question, Hjelmslev was first of all linguist, so he treated all the morphological categories, adjectives, verbs, and like, of course, he focused on Danish and French, and he was more interested in nouns actually than in adjectives or verbs, because also the theory I mentioned, the theory of participation law or the participative opposition theory, comes from morphological studies on the case system. So I don't know whether this answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Just I wanted to maybe to go to the examples. I'm doing like the dissertation about authenticity, and I'm curious how to actually illustrate with Hjelmslev the meaning, so to say, of the word authenticity, or let's say, I don't know, liberty or something.
So if you are asking concretely whether he has some definition of authenticity of other abstract notions, so I would say no, because he was interested in linguistic structure more than the very particular semantic aspects of concrete words.
No, just I want to specify that I'm not interested in Hjelmslev's idea of authenticity, but because I imagine that he didn't do that. But in the case of the word like authenticity, is it an expression or it's a content, or what kind of things is that? Like, if you understand me.
I think I understand. I would say that is any linguistic sign. The word authenticity is both expression and content, of course, because it has all the four components of the schema. Like it has expression and content and form and substance. So the question only is how to define the very form of the content, maybe not that much of the expression in your case. So, but like, yes, you can use all of the four components of the schema to describe semantics of a word.
What to do with like with concepts that are not presented like in other cultures, or whether they are just meaningless, or what does it mean?
I wouldn't know whether there is such a case that a word is non-existent in a given language. I would say that you can try to find some equivalence, as I did with the Japanese word kokoro, because some people would say it doesn't exist in English. Well, in a sense, it doesn't, but you can still translate because, of course, we have translation from Japanese to English, so somehow the translators can manage. And it is just upon to your imagination how you will define the very form, the semantic form of this word authenticity in other languages. Like the form will be different probably, but I wouldn't say that the word doesn't exist in a particular language.
Thank you.
What do you think about this?
Yeah, I very much
agree with Ľudmila, because indeed form might be different, but there is a possibility of translation, and I was actually during either yours or Ľudmila's presentation, this I was thinking about this, that at some point there seemed to be a very, I think maybe it was during yours, because I thought that it was kind of like a very radical position, almost a relativistic position or somehow the question of whether there is intelligibility between languages seem to come up, and well, I think there is. So of course, it might not be possible to say exactly the same things in every language. So for instance, I know that there are some Spanish speakers in the audience, so I will use a Spanish example. So how do you translate John Lennon's Imagine to Spanish when he talks about heaven? So of course, in English you have heaven and you have sky, but in Spanish you only have one word, cielo. And you can, I don't know, you can use paraíso or something else, but then it doesn't really fit with it doesn't really fit with the whole song. So there are differences indeed, but nevertheless, I would think that there are strategies to allow for. Oh, okay. Allow for understanding. Yes, I will try to fix my microphone, but please, yeah, okay, but yes, but please, some more questions from the audience. Are there any more questions? Yeah, okay, good. I didn't. Okay, that's good. So. Because if there are no questions, I would like to ask something to both of you. Yeah. So first, I wanted to ask something to Ľudmila, and well, but also to Tyler, because you are both talking about reciprocal presupposition, but specifically to Ľudmila, does reciprocal presupposition mean the same thing than that participation, or not? And second question, only for Ľudmila, would be whether participation law in Hjelmslev it is equivalent to complementarity, to the Hjelmslevian notion of complementarity, because I know that some people have they have pointed out that Hjelmslev he introduced participation law in his work about cases, which is like one of the earliest works of him. But then in Prolegomena, it seems like this notion it is not there. But I think that it might be there as complementarity, and well, this kind of relates to this reciprocal presupposition. But so, what do you think? And I'm sorry because it might be a too technical question, but yeah.
I know, Taylor, do you want to answer first?
So you're the expert. You should definitely be the one.
Not an expert.
Uh-huh.
But first before I answer your question, Israel, I just have a comment because you mentioned the relativity. So I think it is not really the case of linguistic relativity in Hjelmslev, because in my understanding, it's the contrary. Like the traditional Sapir-Whorf explanation of linguistic relativity is that the language form determines the speaker's viewpoint or understanding of the world, right? But when I was reading Hjelmslev, I had the opposite impression of that it is not the form determining the speaker's viewpoint, but it is rather like the contrary, that the culture or the cultural artifacts, as he says, determine the language form rather. But I don't know whether I'm correct here. And I already forgot your first question, sorry.
about.
Is it the same as participation the same as reciprocal presupposition?
Yes, yes.
No, it is not. It was just my invention to put those two things together. Like Hjelmslev doesn't use the word, neither reciprocal presupposition, neither retroactivity. And participation is so like marginal in Hjelmslev. It is mostly present in his earlier writings. And so I would say it is not the same thing. In my understanding, we can relate the two things because it's somehow one thing presupposes the other. Like in order to have the retroactivity, I think it is good to have the participative relation between form and substance, but it is not the same. And the second question, whether it's the same with the what was the second question? Whether it is
whether participation was present in the Prolegomena as complementarity. So
well, maybe yes. If you want, we can understand complementarity as participation, but I think that participation is something more general, and complementarity would be only one particular demonstration of participation. Maybe that I don't know.
Good. No, but that's very good. Yeah, thank you.
Should I hit this question that's in the chat?
Yes.
So Gary Mostaho poses in the chat. He says his mic's not working. Otherwise, he posed it vocally. He says, question to Tyler. Regarding the positions of Derrida, Kristeva, and Deleuze, is there a dividing limit between logocentrism as phenomenological problem and logocentrism as linguistic or semiotics problem? The interesting question here, I think, is the interesting situation is that to excise logocentrism at the phenomenological level is a colossal task. And I mean, it's like the task, I mean, it's so difficult to describe. It's like the task of all Hermetic philosophies. And it's all over the Old Testament and like the Kabbalah and everything. The idea of actually liberating phenomenological meaning from dependency upon a presumed referent. This is like the idea of the possibility of the truly transpersonal, for example. And the idea is that it's only through language, or at least this is what Derrida would say. It's only through language that we can even prescind the problem, because it's only linguistics that has a high enough degree of articulation, or language, I should say, that has a high enough degree of self-articulation that these ideas can even be parsed. But the goal indeed would be to excise logocentrism at the phenomenological level. Right? But their argument, so language may be part of the problem. Language reinforces logocentrism, at least so say Derrida. Phonological language, alphabetic language reinforces logocentrism through its very structure, and thus is part of the problem. But it is indeed only by and through language that the phenomenological problem of logocentrism can even be tackled.
Okay.
So let's see if he wants to type something. Are you still there? Thank you. Yes, no problem. Okay.
Now, Kalevi has a raised hand, so please.
Yeah, thank you. Both presentations were absolutely excellent and very, very enjoyable and interesting. So, but about about understanding logocentrism, so here Tyler's proposal is, in a way, to generalize the concept of logocentrism. But now, what would you think about this kind of maybe even further generalization, that logocentrism is a feature of that kind of modeling which forgets the freedom what is existing in the object, what is modeled. So that freedom has been in a way described in structuralism via the concept of arbitrariness of the structure. So because arbitrariness itself is a kind of freedom, but it was limited by it. So the true freedom, it is very hard to describe, so to say. This is and this is what now Derrida is trying to do, Christo is trying to do, really, in a way. But so I think this is still something very deep in the method of modeling itself, say, because the means of the modeling we have basically are linguistic so much that how to, but that is one of the fundamental methodological problem of semiotics, say, to try to find means to access that deep freedom what is there in all in living beings, I would say, in a certain extent. What would you think of that kind of, let's say, definition even of logocentrism, a generalized one?
Absolutely, yeah. I might even define logocentrism just as the foreclosure of the incompatibility, as you would call it. But it's really interesting that you attribute this incompatibility to the object, right? The foreclosure of the internal incompatibility of the object, right? And this is, I mean, this is a way of describing that it's closer to biosemiotics, but it's profoundly true. I would also point out that it's profoundly Hegelian. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. I agree completely with what you say. What about you, Ľudmila? What do you think?
I would also agree. Like, I'm not the expert in logocentrism, but I think it is a very nice definition to relate it to the freedom and arbitrariness in language, but which is only a limited version of the freedom that exists in living organisms. So I like it very much.
So there was another comment in the chat.
And there is, okay.
Oh, Gary has something to say. Well, Gary, in a long time.
Hi, I'm obsessed right now about the pervasiveness of the Cartesian worldview in ways that affects everything. And I'm wondering, this is just an idle question off the top of my head. Do you see that logocentrism, as we understand it, is linked to the Cartesian worldview?
I mean, the easy answer is, of course, yes. And this is a classic talking point of semiotics, especially Peircean semiotics.
Right.
It's to attribute what we call logocentrism to mind-body dualism. Right. And of course, that's fundamentally true. I mean, it's true, but I think it's a bit too easy. And as far as blaming Descartes for this. And another way of seeing it, I mean, it kind of depends on what your view on embodiment is. Maybe consciousness is embodied.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe consciousness cannot be programmed or turned to something else, released from its substrate. I would like to think this. I fear the technological event horizon. I do not want to be absorbed. I like bodies, right? Nevertheless, we have to be open to the possibility that consciousness is possibly disembodied. Like it could indeed be, and that could indeed be where this is all going, this technological event horizon now we're all happily participating in right now. Like consciousness could indeed leave the body, and maybe so, and I hope not, you know, but nevertheless, like that could be true, and in that case, it's mind-body dualism, and there's no problem. So that's just one example of how we can't reduce this problem to the Cartesian issue, but the answer is yes. And I would actually rather hear you. What is your position on Descartes and logocentrism, if you have something to say about it?
Well, I'm actually in the note stage of an article that I'm calling the Cartesian stain, where if you think of like a bowl of oatmeal and you drop it on the floor, the oatmeal that goes on the hardwood is a mess that you can clean up. But the oatmeal that goes on the rug is a stain, which is a much deeper question. And I wonder how much of our critique of Cartesianism is the critique of the mess and not the stain. Does that make any sense? Have we looked deep enough into this aspect? Just a random thought.
I like the metaphor. Nice.
I'm thinking the science fiction writer Fred Pohl, and I had the fortune to interview him once, and he was a futurist. And I said, what characterizes a genuine futurist? He said, any idiot could have predicted the impact of the automobile on the formation of suburbs and things like that. He said it would have taken a much keener mind to take a look at the automobile and think about dating, which has probably had more of an impact than all this. I have just one kind of other question, and I'll shut up. What do you think, if any, the relationship of Sebeok's insistence that language is a species-specific activity solely to humans? And do you think that concept privileges logocentrism?
Crucially, no. I mean, I think again, it is to reduce the problem to terms which are misleading.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that that is actually to accord too much importance to language, right? As if it really were special and distinct, and that to deny it to other species is as if to cut them out of the privileged experience of the human experience, when in fact it is just yet one of a number of different modeling systems. And Sebeok wanted to keep the specificity of language instead of generalizing it to include all signifying systems. And you lose something either way you slice it, of course. But I would say that this is not anthropocentrism. Like this is not, I mean, it's not just my position. I've given that one a lot of thought actually, and it kind of depends. But this one's open to it's open to dispute. It's widely disputed.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I just popped into my head, so I don't have any solid thought on it right now. So
yeah, I think they get the question when people call that description, that is the description that language is human specific. When they call it anthropocentrism, I think they're getting the discussion backwards. They're getting it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, especially because, at least, I mean, to think of Sebeok's system as being anthropocentric itself is, I mean, you'd have to really misread Sebeok.
Right. But people, that doesn't stop some people, though, does it?
I know. No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course.
So we have another raised hand, Armando. Are you there still?
Hello to everyone. Armando Treviño here speaking from Mexico. I'm glad to be here sharing this time with all of you and to listen to all of the knowledge you have to share. And I have a question for Ľudmila. I'm very interested in this concept of substance about Hjelmslev's work, you know. And so my question will be like, what will be your recommendation on that notion of Hjelmslev, the substance. I mean, is there, let's say, some kind of another idea that he had earlier, and then he came up to the conclusion of notion, or I don't know, like, I would like you to show me, like, with your knowledge, where can I go to read more about that notion and concept, because, you know, it is something so familiar to me that I have been experimenting with it on fine arts, on music and theater. And for me, it is like, wow, someone else thought about it, you know. I haven't read about it, but I want to. So I think that I will first need to read about this man so wise. And can you tell me something about it?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Armando. Thank you very much for this question. I'm really not an expert in Hjelmslev, despite all what Tyler said, but maybe Israel knows more about the history of the notion of substance in Hjelmslev. But as far as I know, it was first widely described in Prolegomena, and in all the early writings, it was not really present. All the earlier writings were more about the morphological system or the linguistic system itself in the very structuralist manner. And of course, you will find a lot of approaches of applying Hjelmslev to music or visual arts. I think there are, even not that numerous, but you will find something if you want. But Hjelmslev himself was only focused on language. And if you want to read more about the notion of substance, I would like maybe recommend other authors, not Hjelmslev himself, because he was really focused on language. So if you want to apply to other semiotic systems, I really recommend the reading of Tyler's dissertation, because it is very inspiring in this direction. At least it was for me. I don't know, Israel, do you have a better answer to this question?
No. Well, just I will take advantage of the fact that you are Mexican, and no, because some years ago, the Universidad de Puebla, so they have a journal called seminar notebooks, cuadernos del seminario, and they no tópicos del seminario. I'm not sure, but there is an issue about the problem of immanence, starting with Hjelmslev, and all those articles are in Spanish, of course, and they are discussing precisely the problem of the relationships between form and substance in Hjelmslev. Well, mostly in Hjelmslev, also they talk a little bit about Greimas and other semiotic traditions, but maybe there you can also find some interesting things, and of course in the Prolegomena, I'm not sure to which extent this the category of case, it has some something about like some very primitive form proposal of form and substance, because I think I mean, of course, this kind of comes from Saussure, well, from this statement that langue is form and not substance, but so I'm not sure to which extent in the category of case, the first was it the first of Hjelmslev's books, or it was among the first ones? I'm not
I
sure to
think
which
so.
extent there is already something there. But well, of course, the Prolegomena, they are, and they are in Spanish. You can find them in Spanish. And yeah, I wanted to, so there are some questions in the chat, and I would ask you to write. I mean, there are some like petitions in the chat. So I would like you to I would like to tell you that you can always write to semiosalong@gmail.com, and you can because I think that you want some links of where you can find some texts. So yeah, you can send you can write to us there, and we will provide the links or possibly the text if we have them. And yeah, and I don't know, are there more questions? Or
I see Mark and Miriam down here. You guys, the late joiners. If you don't have a question, Mark and Miriam, then I'm going to oh, my mic's on. Sorry, my mic was off. My mic's on now. Mark and Miriam down here. Mark's going to be one of our next presenters, one of the two next presenters in 2 weeks from now. And so, Mark, what are you going to talk about in your presentation? Turn off your mic, or turn on your mic.
Yeah, I can give a short introduction. So I'm gonna make a bit of a sharp turn from the topic, perhaps, because I will talk about interlappings and possible collaborations of cultural data analytics and cultural semiotics. And perhaps the bit of transmutation part is is the aspect of how actually dealing with data and visualizing and using computational approaches, how you go perhaps from one form to another. But my own top interest goes towards the concept of cultural other. But the main idea is how do these cultural semiotics and cultural data analytics fit together.
Word, and that's going to be on the 29th of April. 29th. Yeah. I'm putting down here in the chat for everybody, this is my link tree, because in this link tree you'll find a link to the Semiosalong blog, which is where all the future, everything is there, and the whole archive of all the Semiosalongs back into the prehistory are there. And also there's a YouTube channel where you're going to be able to find this presentation and a bunch of other shameless self-promotional material, such as my dissertation, which someone requested it in the chat. Right, so then Israel's last words.
yeah, so I guess indeed it is a very good time. So yes, we still had a lot of topics that we didn't really tackle, but well, we can do it some other time. Hopefully, I know that there are some people here who I'm sure that we are going to meet at some point, hopefully in some gatherings or something. I hope so. And yeah, so well, basically, I would only like to remind you that indeed next 29th of April, we are going to have Mark Metz and Andrew Creighton. Mark, I will tell the official title of your presentation is going to be cultural data analysis plus cultural semiotics on describing the dynamics of otherness. And Andrew's presentation, oh, I don't have the name here, but it was a very cool name. It had to do with Umwelt and implosion, and he's going to talk about formal rationalization, and it's going to be a very nice session, and it will I think it will really cohere almost as nicely as this one did. So yes, we are very much looking forward to Umwelt, Implosion, and Enchantment. There you go. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yeah. So yes, so thank you a lot, and hope to see you in 2 weeks. And yeah, thanks for joining.
I'm gonna leave the channel open for the next 10 minutes with some more techno music, so you can party with us.
Yeah, or so chat is also open.
Yeah, and the chat's open too. If you think of something more you want to ask us, we'll be here, so we'll answer your questions.
Good. Thank you.
That's the way it should be done.
Nice presentation, Ľudmila. It's sad that we were a bit late. We didn't hear the first half of it, though.
Thanks. Too kind. I'm looking forward to yours in 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yeah. But are you two also from Tartu or somewhere else?
In Tallinn.
Tallinn.
Yeah.
I love the examples of the arts example.
Are they trying to talk?
I had one more related to that, but I think taking my words, I think it's the one that are you aware that about these Renaissance things, there are quite some artists who are doing the live versions of Renaissance paintings into, like, they dress up and mimic it. Do you know this field?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I know.
That they just on purpose dress up and they just simulate the situation, and the beauty of this video is that they start to move like really like normal humans.
Yeah.
I think that is like also quite iconic silhouettes they are doing actually, while even ruining the original image of the painting. I mean, there are quite many videos I watched like that just for. Go to music, I think it's fine. Sure.
I did something like that. I was doing a theater at a high school, and we did some kind of like moving pictures of adaptations of some French painters.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
There are a lot of examples that you can take from arts, and I had really difficult times like choosing one or two because I had so many ideas. And
all right. Yeah. I see that. Yeah, it is quite memorable also, this kind of images. But I checked this Bill Viola. I didn't know that artist. I found it already, and seems quite impressive and well acknowledged artist also. I mean, I checked his Instagram already, so
he is.
Yeah, he's the art
famous.
pages, sort of, whatever, fan pages or something. Sure.
But he does these video installations, and
yeah, quite
only a few of them are actually adaptations of some ancient. More like the major part are just his own creations.
Yeah, but it seems he's very good artist indeed.
I guess
my eye. I'm one of the last presenters And I really aim that I will go to Tartu and I will force Israel to just do it. Like, I think things gonna be better by that time in the end of May. And I want it to be like a real presentation for me, just to, as a presenter. I will negotiate about that.
That would be nice if you do it in presence. So I would be the only one, like, recently.
I really hope that this end of May it will be more open and we can just gather somewhere like together.
Can't you travel right now within Estonia?
Yes, but yeah, of course we can. Just it's easy to go from Tallinn to Tartu, but I mean, I would not stay in Tallinn for this semester. I think I will go to Tartu and at least meet Tyler and Israel from.
Yeah, that's a good idea. How far is it?
2 hours by bus.
That's pretty fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Where are you yourself?